Daniel Larimer, one of the most recognizable names in the blockchain industry, and one of the earliest crypto pioneers who has numerous discussions with Satoshi Nakamoto back in the days, joins us today. Welcome, Dan. Before we dive into the heavy topics today, to those who are new to the blockchain and who has been living under a rock for the past 10 years, could you give them a self-introduction?
Sure, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. Well, I've been in the blockchain space since Bitcoin was 5 cents. And as you mentioned early on, I was in discussions with Satoshi online, concerned about the scalability of Bitcoin, just in terms of the performance and confirmation delays and total throughput. And it was because of those discussions that I went on to create some of the highest performance blockchains out there. Early on was BitShares, which was the first DeFi blockchain way back in 2015. It was the first blockchain with stablecoins. It introduced named accounts and transactions as proof of stake and delegated proof of stake. So there's been a lot of innovations on the BitShares front. But BitShares was a special purpose blockchain that wasn't smart contract, wasn't programmable. So after doing BitShares, I went on and created the first social media blockchain that created an experience that was so easy to use, most people didn't even realize that they were on a blockchain. We had grandmothers coming and signing up and earning tokens, and people in Africa were making money posting content online and coming out of poverty. And so Steem really introduced the first massively collaborative distributed budgeting on a blockchain. And so that was incredibly exciting. It also introduced free transactions or rate limited transactions. And so that was another first, along with hacked account recovery. So that even if you lose your keys or your keys are stolen, if your keys are stolen, then you can recover your account using your old keys, the ones that were stolen, plus a friend or family member. So all these things together constitute a lot of my innovations before tackling smart contracts. And that's when I partnered with Block One, and we created EOS, which is the highest performance smart contract platform in the market today. And it uses a lot of the innovations from the BitShares and Steem, and then creates a whole new programming model. I consider development of smart contracts on EOS.io to be one of the most powerful platforms for building smart contracts out there. So that catches us up to almost today. In the past year, I wrote a book called More Equal Animals, The Subtle Art of True Democracy. That book is all about solving problems with governance, problems that are learned from proof of work governance issues to delegated proof of stake governance issues to worker proposal governance issues to just general purpose. How can we create a democratic society that maximizes the power of the individual and minimizes the probability of tyranny? And so there's a lot of principles that I really had to unpack in the book. And so I released that book, and now I'm utilizing the principles from the book to introduce a project called Eden on top of EOS.io. It's a new DAO, or decentralized autonomous organization, where the community will be able to vote to control how funds are distributed using the principles for More Equal Animals. So that pretty much catches up to today as far as what I'm doing. And then there's one other project I'm working on right now, which is called Clarion. It's a logically decentralized social media platform. It's a way to communicate with your friends and family, doing everything you can do on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, only without relying on any single centralized server. You own your account. It's not based on a blockchain. And so no matter what you can communicate to everyone who wants to listen to you without any middleman censoring you. And so that's Clarion, which I see as sort of like a foundational tool to facilitate the EOS community staying in touch and communicating in face of tech giants which are trying to censor us.
That's a very impressive list of accomplishments. And we know that you have been very active online, especially within the blockchain scene. And it was a very interesting period back in 2020 that you pretty much disappeared from Twitter. And that caused a lot of speculations of what happened to Dan Larimer. And now we know you were working on a book called More Equal Animal. And it's not a popular thing to be writing a book right now. So what actually drove you to write this? Are there any interesting aspects that you see in the society that can be further improved?
Yeah, I've been working on technology to create free market voluntary solutions for securing life, liberty, property, and justice for all. The issue is that if you create the best technology in the world and the people don't have the philosophical principled background to use the technology, then you're not going to get the result you want. And so two things, I think by writing. So writing the book was how I was answering the questions for myself in an organized, coherent manner. But also, if I put it in book form, I put all the ideas that I've been developing for the past 10 years in one place for people to digest and get caught up with everything that I've learned about how people need to collaborate, how we reach consensus, why we reach consensus, how power gets shifted by Pareto principles, and so forth. So writing the book was really foundational to building consensus in the community around a set of principles of what democracy should look like. And I saw that those ideas are more important than any particular technology. And the book was a way to have a big impact on the world just by getting the ideas out there in a coherent way.
Your book is also in PDF form. It's free to download, so anyone can read it. And yes, I think some people have ideas of how society can be run better, and some would even take the plunge and get into politics like Trump. And is politics like another career choice that you would consider down the road, or you prefer to be in blockchain?
When you read my book, you'll see that the political processes that we have today are a complete sham. It would be a waste of time to compete in them. I identify the formation of political parties as sort of a shadow government or governments that take over the intended constitutional governments of the United States, or really applies to whatever country you're in. If you've got election structured a certain way, it's always going to divide into two halves, and there's going to be the political parties themselves have an internal governance structure. And the best analogy I could have is it's like when people collude outside the blockchain to manipulate the on-chain governance, right? There's some other governance that's not talked about, and officially the token holders are voting, unofficially the parties are in control. Right? Officially, the United States has 3 branches of government: judicial, legislative, executive. But unofficially, it's, the parties, everyone's party line, you got the parties across all 3 branches. So, and if you don't follow the party line, you're not getting reelected. The party's not going to support you. You're not going to get the power. And so we end up with votes in Congress that are right down party line. That's not a Congress of 100 independent thinking individuals evaluating the situation. That's a Congress of people that are captured by political parties. And so we've seen this happen in the blockchain space. We've seen it happen in real life. And in my book, I introduce ways you can structure a democratic election process so that forming political parties is not practical. It's not a matter of outlining that there shall be no parties, because you can't, just like saying you there shall be no Sybil attacks, right? You have to structure the algorithm for consensus such that it's not really possible to form these parties. And that's where we introduce randomness into the voting system, because that breaks up political parties.
So do you see blockchain as a technology that can potentially evolve the currently popular two-party system to an even better one?
Yeah, well, not just blockchain. Is any organization can adopt the governance policies the democratic philosophy I outlined in my book. I think it's a great opportunity to implement a governance structure on blockchains like EOS to elect a hierarchy of people, each with their own budgets to fund things. It can create a system where you can actually enforce subjective values, right? Blockchains are all about objective consensus, but life isn't about the objective, right? There's so many things outside of blockchain that depend on subjective values, which means we need to subjectively identify leaders that represent the people versus leaders that represent the media and the banks and the political parties. And so if we can do that, now we can have unique, but not government identity, but unique verified people who can then participate in social media platforms like Steemit without having the weight of the whales, right? Without being subject to that kind of Pareto distribution and abuse. It can actually reflect things. You can elect moderators for social media, just like you elect people to distribute funds. If we need to have oracles for prediction markets and the like, or we want to have block producers that are vetted by subjective standards, not just can they get exchanges with other people's money voting for them, or they happen to buy a lot and own it themselves. So there's a lot of things that are possible once you can reach soft consensus on subjective matters in a way that is immune from incumbents, immune from public campaigning, and is actually able to tap the wisdom of the crowds.
Mm-hmm. You did mention social media, and you also have started several social media platforms, Steemit. I think you also are involved in Voice to a degree, or maybe less.
Not anymore, no.
And that can be because you are making a new one called Clarion OS. Could you tell us why your fascination with social media? Because a lot of people might think that Facebook has captured most of the market, and this is like a great idea 10 years ago, but not anymore. So why another social media project?
Sure. So social media is all about tools for communicating. One of the things I've identified is you can't give people freedom as a service, right? Because you're dependent on the service provider, which means you're actually a slave to them. So you can't give communication as a service, which is what Twitter and Facebook and Voice and even Steem and Hive do. They're logically centralized. There's a third party in there that gets to say whether or not what you want to say can reach the world. With Clarion, it's a tool that you use and your friends use. And as long as you've got an internet connection and you can connect to their computer, your message will get out to the entire world, because it uses a friend-to-friend network to propagate the message without a blockchain. So when I see things like a sitting president of the United States get completely censored and banned from all social media platforms, and when competing centralized services get shut down from Apple and Google and Amazon simultaneously in a coordinated fashion, I know that we need tools that are not dependent upon big tech companies, that are not dependent upon any third party who could be pressured to censor you for what you want to say. So Clarion solves that niche. And it does so in a way that's even more decentralized than email. You would think that email is decentralized because it's a federated system. You can create your own domain name and put your own email server on it, and now you own your email account, right? Except you don't. You don't own the domain system. which could be taken away from you if you're using a provider, whether it's Google or Apple or Proton Mail or your local ISP. If they can shut down your email account and now you can't receive anymore. But with Clarion, you can do email, which is like asynchronous communication while people are offline. You can do that without losing your account. No one can shut down your account because your account exists on multiple servers simultaneously, and a lot of those servers are your friends and family, not centralized service providers that can decide they don't like you and nuke your online identity.
It sounds like Clarion OS is not moderated and anyone can say anything they want.
That is true, although it is filtered through your friends and family. You only see messages from people you follow or people that the people you follow interact with. So, for example, if I was using Clarion and I had my followers, it'd be very rare that I would see messages wanting to hurt me or spam me or anything like that, because my friends and family would not tolerate that kind of abuse. They'd unfollow those people and so forth. So it does filter it through your social network, but it doesn't prevent you from the idea of censorship. The way I think about it is you have a person who wants to speak and a person who wants to listen, and somebody gets in between and says you're not allowed to talk to each other. That's censorship. And there's two ways of doing censorship. One is you have a service provider that says, nope, you two aren't allowed to talk to each other. The other is spam, right? You're in a Telegram channel trying to have a conversation with someone, and then someone comes in and starts shouting, right? That's preventing conversation. And stopping that spam is actually, the spam is the censorship, because it's preventing willing parties from hearing each other. And instead you got one party that's speaking and the other people that don't want to listen. So with that broader definition of censorship, which is the interference of third parties communicate, or two people communicating, it really highlights the need for something like Clarion, which doesn't exist in the market today.
Yeah, and with a lot of social media giants with their presence and network effect that has been established for the past 10 years, how do you see this new social media platform gain traction? Maybe like the outcast can join and be like the best place, but for the rest of people who are like happy with Facebook, how do you get them to switch over?
The nice thing is you don't need to worry about them switching over. Unlike other social media platform businesses, this is a tool. You download the tool, you use the tool, not relying on a company to provide service. There's no company that can go out of business. So you get your friends and family on this, and then you don't need Facebook anymore. So it's just about people working their social network and saying, guys, let's be independent. Let's take responsibility for our infrastructure that we depend on to communicate, so that no one can manipulate our thoughts by controlling what we see and what we can and cannot say to each other. And eventually, more and more people will switch to such a platform. And you see there's an exodus from Facebook and Twitter to other platforms. And that's so scary that they shut down the competing platforms, because now you have an entire platform worth of people doing things that are deemed bad and needs to be shut down, right? But once you have Clarion, it's kind of like BitTorrent. You can't take it down anymore. There's no company to go after. It's kind of the final destination.
That sounds very futuristic, and it's really good to see that someone like you, very reputable, is building it. Could you tell us what's the current project status, and how can people join to help out?
So the project's in the design phase. And I'm just putting together a team of developers. Right now it's me and one guy part-time. And starting in the middle of April, I'll have a team of 6 people, really competent developers that are going to be working on a number of things, Clarion, but also Eden, which implements the more equal animals governance model into EOS. So this is going to be a multi-year roadmap. I've got sustainable funding to see this through as long as the dollar's worth something. and so we are in a good place to go to see these things come to light. It's just a matter of time.
Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that for say mid to long-term investor and speculator, it has been a very rewarding strategy to invest in Dan Larimer's project. So is Clarion OS investable this year?
No, I am not creating any other investable tokens. In fact, I wouldn't call it investing. A lot of these things are speculation out there. But I'm really focused on building the community, of getting people with like-minded desires for freedom to come together and to cooperate, to do something good together, not just pile on to make a lot of money. Making money is great, but at the end of the day, you're keeping score in fiat. You're keeping score in the currency that they're debasing. And when those hyperinflate, did you actually win anything if you don't have a tool and a community that is operating independently with its own currency? So it's all about creating independence for the people that join the project. And that means building a little microeconomy inside where we don't even need to reference outside prices. We're not trying to bring people in to pump the price up so we can dump on them, right? That creates a negative relationship between the existing holders and the people we're trying to invite in. But if instead everyone's focused on how can I add the most value to EOS, and I'm not looking to exit because I'm already where I want to be. We've got our own little virtual country, and we're going to maximize our internal economy and then invite people in, not because we want to exit, but because we want to have more people playing this game of independence with us.
And you just mentioned EOS community, trying to get people in and grow the community. Is Clarion OS going to be on EOS?
Clarion is below the blockchain. It can be a wallet that facilitates onboarding to EOS by inviting friends, because the same keys you use on Clarion can be used to create a EOS account, and you can use the EOS network to register identities and kind of a directory services kind of role. So there's a synergy between EOS and Clarion that I'm looking to leverage, and I think that will be really bring all the communities together. And if Clarion's successful, then the EOS community can grow too.
Yeah, and we know that several months ago you resigned from the CTO title of Block One, and going forward, people are wondering what's your involvement going to be with Block One and EOS.io? Are you still going to be advising them, or more hands-on?
I'm working with them just like any other community member or block producer could work with them. I talk to their blockchain engagement group and try to find ways to work together. But right now I'm equal to everyone else outside of Block One in terms of my relationship to Block One. I advise them just like I advise the whole world, right? If I have ideas, I post a blog post on it, and Block One can read it, and everyone can take it in, and we can figure out which way we'd like to go.
And let's zoom out a bit to the broader blockchain community. A lot of these public blockchains is switching from proof of work to proof of stake, which kind of proves that proof of stake is the right way to go. And is that how you feel as well, and that your thoughts has proven right?
Proof of stake is a very broad concept, right? There's lots of ways of accounting for stake. There's lots of ways of selecting who's in the producer set that have different finalities and things like that. And BitShares and Steem and EOS all have different variations of delegated proof of stake. And so I think that's great. The one challenge with proof of stake is stakes Pareto distributed. And Pareto distributed means it's the 80-20 rule. 80% of the results are created by 20% of the effort, or 80% of the control is by 20% of the people. which means 51% of the controls by 1% of the people. And so, if you want a decentralized system and you put control in a Pareto distributed environment, then you're just going to end up with oligarchy. There's this hidden government behind the apparently democratic token election. So I've actually been working on a new consensus algorithm that can be used to create even more censorship resistant blockchains that doesn't have the politics associated with electing people to produce blocks. And I call it proof of burn. The idea is that instead of the best chain being defined by whoever does the most proof of work, and then awarding block producers tokens, the best chain is defined by which ones burned the most tokens or reduce the token supply the most. And the person who gets to produce the next block is the one who pays the most to produce that block, which means that the more people compete to be controlling the block production, the more the token supply is going down. And in order to sustain your monopoly over block production, you've got to continually be buying tokens from the community. And eventually you run out of money unless you're making money by producing blocks. And then the business model of the block producers is to collect transactions from people, charging them one fee, and then putting them into a block that they bought for a lower fee, and they keep the spread on that. And so with this model, there's the principle is that broadcasting on a blockchain is a scarce resource. It's a valuable resource. It's a privilege to broadcast on the chain, and that the people who should be rewarded are the people who are abstaining from broadcasting, and the token governs who gets to broadcast on the chain. So I believe that this algorithm is more censorship resistant. It's got all the energy efficiencies of proof of stake without the Pareto concerns that you might otherwise have, and without the problems you have with proof of work. Now, there's obviously other details that go into making such a system work, but that's the principle of inverting the logic of, instead of block producers being rewarded with tokens, they're burning it. And I think that you'll see that Bitcoin eventually gets there as the halvings continue and the inflation of Bitcoin goes to zero. Eventually, you won't submit a transaction just for any miner to include. You submit it to a particular miner, which will then charge you one thing and then put it in a block. And the proof of work is not going to really be a factor anymore. So I think that proof of burn is the future of wildly decentralized, censorship-resistant blockchains, but proof of stake systems like EOS is for high-performance, low-latency governed systems, and I think there's room for both of them.
And with this new proof of burn algorithm, is it going to be in your new project or in a different project, or is it just like a conceptual idea that you're publishing?
It's an idea that I hope somebody can pick up and use if I don't have time to get to it. But I'm thinking that it's a way to create many blockchains. Instead of one blockchain doing 10,000 transactions per second, you have 1,000 blockchains doing 10 transactions per second. And then you select which of those blockchains you want your app to subscribe to, so that we've got to get beyond everybody running everything, because that centralizes it into infrastructure providers, right? You need cloud services that can handle this big data in order to build your application. And that's a dependency. If you really want to have independence for the people, they need to be able to run the software only on their computer, talking with their friends and family from a gossip perspective, and then reach consensus and build whatever applications you want. So I think that's the future for decentralized free systems. And then you have a spectrum of increasingly centralized systems. You go to all blockchains are logically centralized, and then you got all the way in private blockchains, which are politically and economically centralized as well. So there's use for everything on the spectrum, but for those of us who really value freedom and independence, we want to go as logically decentralized as possible and running all of our own infrastructure on our home computers, on our home internet connection as possible, because that maximizes our freedom.
Yeah, and it sounds like this won't be a future that Amazon wants to see. Do you see Amazon being threatened with their AWS? And how long do we get there to this future that you're seeing?
It'd be interesting to see. There's always going to be need for AWS like services, because sadly, most people actually don't want independence. Most people would prefer convenient slavery to anything that's slightly inconvenient. They don't want to take personal responsibility. So I think that there's a place for everyone, and those of us who are willing to take responsibility, this gives us the tools to do so. And whether or not services like Amazon continue is really going to depend upon the willingness of people to depend on companies engaged in censorship.
And talking about the broader blockchain industry, you have been here long enough, and with what's happening up till this year, that crypto is being more and more regulated, and with bigger players coming in, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like this is the only way to go, or this is not what the early pioneers wanted?
I don't know what the early pioneers wanted, but there's the earlier adopters that had certain desires for a currency that was anonymous and free from regulation and free from control of the banks and cheap to use. Well, Bitcoin's none of those things. Ethereum's none of these things. And every single blockchain out there is compromised or evolved into something that's looking more and more like the system we had. I have been pointing out recently that Bitcoin is less divisible than gold. A lot of people like to say, well, Bitcoin's got 8 decimal points of precision. It's extremely divisible, until you realize that there's a minimum dust size, right? You can't transact in values that are too small because there's not enough capacity on the network to support all the transactions that want to occur and support all the balances that people want to maintain, which means that there's a minimum effective transactional amount, right? So if you assume that no one wants to pay more than a 1% transaction fee, or let's say even a 3%, right? Like a credit card. And no one pays 3% transaction fees on money transfers. They pay only a fixed fee. But if you assume that and you look at what the smallest amount that you can transfer in Bitcoin, the smallest practical Bitcoin transfer is already hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in order for the fee to be an acceptably small percentage. And then as Bitcoin goes up in value, that's only going to increase, right? And now if you look at the smallest practical unit of gold, it's like a dime, a tenth of an ounce or so, so small you're afraid you're going to lose it, kind of size. That value is less than the smallest amount of Bitcoin that you can transfer, right? The gold coin's like $200 and the Bitcoin is hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So Bitcoin is less divisible than gold, which means that Bitcoin is going, if it's widely adopted as a currency, it's going to disappear into the vaults of banks, just like gold disappeared into the vaults of banks. And you're not going to transfer Bitcoin anymore. You're going to transfer deposits at banks, and there's going to be new wire transfer protocols, potentially using something like EOS to move funds between banks. And things will only settle in Bitcoin very rarely in very large quantities between things. At the end of the day, the people didn't get the financial banking freedom they wanted out of Bitcoin because it doesn't scale to allow it. Doesn't mean you can't make a ton of money by buying Bitcoin and holding it, but it's not providing the freedom that we desired. It might temporarily hold the banks more accountable to things, but eventually fractional reserves can be introduced as no one takes out their Bitcoin and things are opaque. And then eventually they say, oh, redeemability in real Bitcoin is outlawed. Only governments and regulated institutions can actually own Bitcoin. And then we're right back where we are now, where the supply of Bitcoin goes to infinity, because Bitcoin is just a name for a unit of account that is no longer tied to the actual ledger of Bitcoins out there. And so that's a problem we face as long as we're relying on logically centralized blockchains, one global currency, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or EOS, and we don't get the scalability we need to make sure that people can operate these systems just on their home computer. So there's a lot of research that needs to be done to achieve the original vision of freedom and independence from a monetary sense that blockchain represented in the early days.
And in the scenario you just described, you said government owning Bitcoin in the vault. Is this something that you predict will happen, that central bankers will want to hold these as hold Bitcoin as reserve assets?
We've already seen proposed legislation and regulations from the US government of preventing you from controlling your own private keys. So it's already being discussed. And not only that, currently Bitcoin is hard enough to use that a lot of people don't even want to hold their own keys, right? So a lot of people will say, yeah, it's not very different, I can do it. So Bitcoin's become a speculative asset that helps people get rich as people adopt it, more than a tool for freedom that we had originally hoped. It might serve as a temporary added integrity to the system, but you'll notice that one of the first regulated products for trading Bitcoin was cash settled, just like the gold and silver markets, so they can attempt to print infinite Bitcoin in futures contracts to control the supply. So there's games that they have used over time to take over gold and silver and manipulate its price. There's attempts to do the same thing to Bitcoin. It's a little bit harder because Bitcoin's currently relatively easy to take possession of and transfer, unlike gold and silver. But the trajectory that I see the regulations and the market and everything going is one where Bitcoin is just another financial product that you need the permission of the financial system to use, which means those of us who came for the freedom and came for the ability to opt out need to look for alternative solutions.
And you earlier you mentioned that, say, once Bitcoin reaches maximum supply, there's no more happening or no more Bitcoin mined. Can you elaborate that, how you see the new landscape play out as, you know,
Sure.
miners don't earn these Bitcoin rewards?
People are still going to be competing for the right to include transactions in blocks. As they do so, they're going to be burning electricity, and they're going to be charging their customers transaction fees, and then trying to make money on the spread. But instead of broadcasting your transaction for any miner to include, you give it to your bank, and your bank is the only one that can mine that transaction so that they can collect the transaction fee from you. And so you see all the different banks or whatever companies that exist in the payment companies competing to get market share of customers, giving them transactions to include in the blockchain, and then keeping their monopoly power, or their pricing power, is based on how much electricity they have and how efficient they can be at producing blocks compared to other parties. But it's also going to be a cartel, because if you've got 51%, you don't have to respect the blocks of the 49%. You can completely ignore them, which forces everyone to send transactions to the 51% in the cartel. So that's the outcome I predict for Bitcoin. And who knows, Bitcoin might be currency of the future that saves world economies on the other side of a global hyperinflation. But I don't know that it's going to give everyone the freedom that we hope it would give us.
And in the scenario that you predicted, there's going to be, say, the 51% cartel. Wouldn't that make the Bitcoin network more fragile? And do you see the miners today will play the minor role in the future, like they become banks? Or do you see the traditional banking system, they replace the current miner and be the miner of the future?
There's all kinds of ways it could evolve, but one way or another is going to be organizations that are responsible for accepting all transactions, and there's only going to be 2 or 3 of them, and it's going to be potentially more centralized than the Federal Reserve System.
Wow. Let's talk about some altcoins. So back in 2017, during the ICO craze, we see BTC dominance down to below 40%. And this time around, BTC dominance has stayed above 60%. Where do you see altcoins go from here? Are they going to persist like Bitcoin has, or do you see them going away?
Both. Some of them will thrive as competing currencies if they have unique value propositions that are supported by real world use cases and real communities doing real things. Those will thrive. The ones that are just alternative currencies, they might see less and less dominance because there's just more money to be made riding the primary chain. The need to keep transaction costs low will probably keep a lot of competition between things like whether it's Bitcoin Cash or Litecoin or Dogecoin or not. These things are just clones of Bitcoin, more or less. Might still have value, like gold, silver, and copper might have value, and they'll be out there speculating just for speculating. There are no fundamentals driving the value of these things other than a community of people that are using them for their own microeconomies and for their own currency value. So to the extent that these tokens are listed on multiple exchanges and that they can be used to facilitate moving value from one exchange to the other with cheaper fees, I think that some of those tokens will survive. The vast majority will not. I think there's a lot of .com bubble-like valuations on the coin market cap, where there's people are speculating on these things without consideration for, are they valuing it as a currency or are they valuing it as a company or a business? What's the price to earnings ratio versus everything else? And all these things are way out of whack for a lot of projects that are focused on just utility value. So I think the utility value tokens are going to collapse back down to be valued more like stocks. And the money ones are going to continue to grow because of their monetary use, which is not tied to utility. It helps to have utility, just like gold and silver have utility. Bitcoin has some utility, but monetary value is where all the capital gains are going to be as people adopt it for a currency. Just like monetary value represents the majority of the value of gold.
And how many, say, monetary currencies do you see the world needs besides Bitcoin? Maybe Doge, how many in total that the world needs?
As many as possible is the answer if you believe in freedom. Because each of these monetary systems is governed by somebody. And so you want to decentralize the governance of money. You want the money to be as decentralized as possible, so that if your country entirely depends on another country's currency, they get to tax you. They get to control half of every transaction going on in your country. And if they cut you off, what happens to your local economy? You've created dependence, which enslaves one country to another. So you want to use as local a currency as possible to maximize your personal economic power and influence and independence in the world. And if you jump straight to using the global currency. Well, global currencies should be used for international trade between local communities and not by the members of the local communities. So I outline a lot of those things in my book as far as why you would want to have many currencies and use local currencies instead of global currencies as a way of maximizing and incentivizing localism.
And last questions. Where is BTC top price for 2021 for this year?
I don't speculate on the future of Bitcoin prices because I have no idea how low the dollar is going to go.
Oh, it's not like how low the euro is going to go. Have some faith in dollar, please.
Hard to do when they're printing trillions of it.
Yeah, I know. Well, I mean, as long as euro keeps printing too, then dollar will be okay.
Yeah, we can all go down together.
Yeah, and well, Dan, thank you very much for your time. Before we close, any last comments, anything you want to say to the Chinese community?
I just like to thank the Chinese community for all the support you guys have given me over the years. It's really made everything I'm doing today possible and has really enabled me to pursue my vision for free market voluntary solutions to secure life, liberty, property, and justice and independence for all. I think that this made possible by your generous support and enthusiasm for the things I'm doing. And I look forward on delivering as much value as I can back to you guys.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you all for watching. And please make sure to go download Dan's new book, More Equal Animals.